Jaja, es inútil que pretendáis alcanzarme. La medalla de oro será para mí. Hay que escarmentar a ese fanfarrón. ¿Oh? Caramba, no los veo. ¿Se habrán retirado? Voy a ver. Quiero reírme un poco más a costa de esos zoquetes. Ahora alcanzamos si puedes. Tramposos! Like many European countries, Spain developed its own comics tradition, drawing off of their own cultural narratives, pop culture, and history in early forms of sequential art that later developed into the comic form properly. In Spain, the biggest magazine was TBO, which was a broadside published newspaper comic strips, basically similar to what we had in America before World War II, and the paper shortage led to the decreasing in size of the adventure serial strips and their slow consignment into the dustbins of history and irrelevance. But in Spain, TBOs, as they began to become called, were incredibly popular for a long time. In fact, TBO became one of the words used for comics in all of Spain, punning off of the magazine's name and the Spanish phrase te veo, meaning I see you. So, why did this comic become so popular? Why it is due to its long-running success. I'm going to dig into a little bit today by reading a random edition of TBO. Hi, my name is Steven, but you may better know me by my superhero alter ego, Spike Stonehand. And welcome to my channel, Dividing Comics, where I explore the magic hidden between the panels of your favorite comics.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality.
If this is your first time here, welcome to my channel. I am doing the 52 Comics Challenge, where I am picking a comic from a number of different categories, one a week, and talking about them on my YouTube. You can find the full list of 52 categories that I've created in the description of this video, but they are designed to increase my knowledge of the breadth and depth of comics as a global and historical medium. And what better example than today's episode where I will talk about a popular magazine from Spain's comic history. If you would like to support me in this challenge, you'd like to participate yourself, there's a few different ways you can do that. Comment below with the things that you are reading and then your thoughts on various comic books as you go along the 52 comic journey yourself. You can give this video a like and subscribe to my channel, hit the notification button. All of these things help boost this video in the algorithm and help spread the love of comics to the broader denizens of YouTube. You can also find my writing over at spikestonehand.com. There I blog about new comics that are coming out every week, links to reviews, interviews, podcast episodes, YouTube videos that I think are interesting and worth your time. So check all that over at spikestonehand.com. But getting to today's topic, TBO. This is going to be a bit of a weird episode for a number of reasons. One, when I was making this list, I knew that TBO was the popular magazine for comics in Spain, but I didn't realize how hard it would be to find copies of this that you can just read online. There aren't really any legitimate sources that have published full editions of this. Now, there are certain characters that were debuted in these in TBO magazine that then were collected and sometimes even translated. Characters like the Ulysses family or Zippe and Zappe, those debuted in this magazine or magazines published by the same parent company, but the actual copies of this magazine, the way that you would be able to read copies of 2000 AD, Metal Hurlant, or what I'll be covering next week, Weekly Shonen Jump, it just doesn't really exist in legitimate sources. You have to kind of find people that have scanned and uploaded their own copies to various websites in order to read any of these at all. Further, it's really hard for me to find a lot of information on the actual history of these magazines, of Spain's comic culture in general. So a lot of what I'm going to be relying on is actually my knowledge gained from reading a different comic, which is El Invierno del Dibujante, The Winter of the Cartoonists, which is drawn by the incredibly popular and beloved current-day Spanish cartoonist Paco Rosa. This tells the true story of, I believe it was in the 1960s, around the time of the issue of the TBO that I read, where a number of the popular artists for editorial Bruguera, which was the biggest publisher of comics at that time, decided to strike off on their own and start their own magazine where they didn't have to deal with the editorial censorship that they were faced, both at the hands of the owners of the magazine and by the Francoist state at the time. And I think that one of the things that that story argues is that this censorship, especially from Franco, it led to a stunting of Spanish comics culture. If you look at all of the biggest Spanish artists today, very few of them actually work with publishers in Spain. A lot of the biggest and best known talents will end up either working in US comics, publishing things for Marvel, DC, Image, or they'll end up working for Franco-Belgian publishers, making bande dessinée. For example, the artist behind Black Sad, which is a really popular bande dessinée published in France about anthropomorphic animal noir detective story. The artist from that is from Spain, but he doesn't work as often with actual Spanish publishers. At least that's not the work that gets published globally and gets widespread acclaim. And I think that, just similar to how the Comics Code Authority maybe stunted U.S. comics for several decades, I think Spain's comic scene is only recently coming into fruition with cartoonists like Paco Rosa due to the decades of repression by Francisco Franco and his fascist regime. So all that to say, reading the random TBO that I found online was an interesting experience because it is actually very similar, as I said previously, to the form of American newspaper comics that you would find before World War II. These would be what's called a broadsheet. So imagine like you would a newspaper comic today, except instead of the comics being crammed into a couple pages in the back, it'd be 16 full pages of comics. Most of the series would get a half page or a full page all by themselves. Maybe even some of the biggest series and adventure serials would get more than one page per edition. And it would be very high quality printing for the day, full color often, sometimes black and white. But these were the heyday of the adventure serial of swashbuckling romance and action, high fantasy in comics. These were the pinnacle of comics in a way that the comic book that later took over from publishers like Marvel and DC really didn't hit their stride until decades after the heyday of the newspaper comic. And this TBO was very similar to that. In fact, it was one story that got 3 or 4 pages, and the rest of them were half a page to a full page of individual comics that were all by different cartoonists with different ideas and premises and structures even. So the edition that I found was TBO 2323, which was published in 1963. So for context, Marvel in the modern sense of the publisher had only been really around for 2 or 3 years, right, since Fantastic Four #1 brought about the Marvel Age of Comics. DC Silver Age is really only 4 years or so in the running. Yet even by this point, the TBO feels to me very out of date. I know a lot of people reading today read comic books published in the 1960s and think, wow, this is incredibly out of date, but reading this TBO feels like you're reading something from even further into the past, and that's not even getting into any potential translation issues you might have if you don't read Spanish. I read a little bit of Spanish. I was kind of able to get by, but I did use a lot of Google Translate to help me looking through a lot of this. And I think that that's if I was going to take the 2,000-foot view of this, I would say a lot of the cartooning is nowhere near as advanced as a lot of the other stuff that I have talked about. Like last week when I talked about how great Metal Hurlant was visually, how the vast majority of the stories I could understand without reading a single word in French. That is very much not the case with almost any of the stories in this magazine. They are, like newspaper comics, really dependent on the dialogue and the captions. They're not designed to tell the full story purely on visuals alone. They are much more reliant on a lot of the dialogue, almost closer to an illustrated story than they would be comics in the proper sense, if that distinction makes sense. So the first story in this issue, and the only one that gets more than 1 page, is called Tontalin de Tarascon, which roughly translates to the little fool from Tarascon. This comic was also one of the only ones that I could find good attribution for, because a lot of if they didn't sign their art, a lot of the comics here didn't give any other credit, and so you could see that this was by Moreno. That's Arturo Moreno, who was cartoonist behind a lot of popular series. He drew works for this magazine and for some of the other big ones in Spain at the time, like Pulgarcito, and this is a recurring character in his oeuvre, like you would find in a classic newspaper strip. But I have to say, I was put off by this story for a number of reasons. It tells the story of an old man, Tontalin, who is reminiscing about his time as a younger man. He's, as an old man, showing you his trophy room where he has the heads of a bunch of animals that he has hunted, but he is commenting on the story why he doesn't have an elephant's head. And he gives this whole long story about his time journeying to Africa, not a country in Africa, just Africa. And he encounters tons of bureaucracy and has to fill out all these forms and get a vaccine, get the proper approval, and yada yada yada. He gets so frustrated he gives up and doesn't hunt any elephants. And first and foremost, the kind of biggest elephant in the room, to put too fine a point on it, is that this comic has incredibly racist portrayals of black people, of Africans, again from this unnamed country. They are drawn in exactly the most offensive stereotype that you can think of, and none of them have any real character or personality, unlike the white main character or the white government bureaucrats that he deals with. It's very bad, and it's kind of hard to even evaluate the comic outside of that, given that it is only 3 pages long. But even still, I think that there's not a lot going for this story. It is the same joke told repetitively over a lot of panels and a lot of dialogue over this brief 3 pages. You get it. There's a lot of bureaucracy. Needs to fill a lot of paperwork. This would have worked much better as a short gag comic instead of dragging it out for so long and filling it with so much repetitive dialogue. Especially since you can't really understand what's going on if you don't understand that dialogue. The story isn't at all visually clear and told, because it is a lot of talking heads. It's a character talking to another character with nothing else visually of interest going on. So moving on from that, the rest of the magazine, the other 14 or so pages, are, like I said, half page to full page gag comics, and I find that these generally worked a lot better than the previous story, because they had the knowledge to get in and get out with their one joke. There was a story about a cocky racer who, after bragging about how easy his victory was going to be, his competitors pull a prank on him so that they can win. It's nothing groundbreaking there, but it's worth not even a real out loud laugh, but the kind of laugh that you mean when you say LOL in a text message. There's some story of a couple kids that are talking about how great it is to be lazy because by being lazy they prompt everybody else to do better, and then they'll get more food because I'm not working, so I don't need to eat as much. All these reasons why being lazy is so great, and with hitting with a punchline, except for all the boredom. It's a simple gag, but it's like 4 panels, so again, not that big of a deal. One of these even worked visually without looking at the words. It was like the one time that this comic worked on that level, and it reminded me of the old Rube Goldberg comics where you'd have kind of a complicated visual device that accomplished something silly. Here it was an invention that is designed to help old people feel not so old anymore. And it's just this man sees a kid doing a handstand, and he's like, "Man, I'm not that young anymore. I can't do a handstand." And then the invention says, "But maybe you can," and it's just a thing that stabilizes you while you stand upside down on your hands. Then the machine supports you, so you're not actually having to work hard or do anything impressive when you're standing on your hands. It was a silly gag, but it worked visually. That was kind of cool to see that. There was another comic that actually I think was maybe the best joke in the whole issue, but again, you had to understand Spanish to get it. It tells the story. It's this guy who's wearing a ridiculously large hat. And he's like, "Yeah, I know. I keep falling for these salesmen. I don't know why. I need to stop buying such things that I don't need, but I have a problem. I'm addicted. The guy told me, that I didn't need this hat. I told him, like, hey, not in the market. But he convinced me. He said, well, if I buy this one hat, I'll get a second one for free." And so then he pulls out his second really large big hat. That was maybe the best joke in the issue. The final comic in the story was La Famille Ulysses, which is another one of the classic TBO series. I believe this might have even have been a reprint of an old classic comic from them. And then the crazy thing about this one is that it relies entirely on a pun in the Spanish language for its punchline. So if you don't get it, or even if you have the joke explained to you, you probably won't find it funny. But it's this family that hears that Mr. Lopez, their neighbor, has passed, and they go to his wife and they offer condolences, and they say, "Hey, I'll make you, something nice. I'll give you food for this week. Just anything you need, let us know." And she's like, "That's very thoughtful, but it's kind of a lot, don't you think?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" And then the husband, Mr. Lopez, comes out, and they're like, "Whoa, Lopez! I thought you had died." And then the lady says, "No, not Lopez. Elpez, my fish, my Pez." Has died, and it's a little gag of the goldfish belly up, and it's bowl. That's in. That's it. That's the joke. They kind of build it up. A lot of these kind of take the structure of Shaggy Dog jokes because you could tell the joke in 3 or 4 panels, but they have a full page or half a page, and so they kind of have to drag it out and build up the tension and suspense for the punchline, which I kind of like. I think that maybe American newspaper comics could use some of that. I know they don't have a lot of the space, so they don't really get the opportunity to do so. But every now and then, I think that the Shaggy joke setup of these newspaper comics actually kind of works well. But more or less, there's nothing beyond that level. There's nothing that has elevated the form, really pushed the boundaries at all. This to be the kind of thing that you would buy for a dime, have a few laughs and then throw away. It's not surprising to me that a lot of these comics have not been collected or translated into English at least, and then that they haven't been shared widely, even aside from the racist comic that the beginning of the issue. There just wasn't a lot necessarily here that really makes you excited about comics as comics. It's kind of the same way that you would read modern newspaper comic and go, that's the best you can really expect for most of these. So wrapping up, would I continue reading these? I'm going to say the answer is no. I don't think I'm going to keep searching out TBOs, especially given how hard it is to find any of them, and that there's no ongoing narrative. I might consider reading if any of you are experts in the Spanish comic scene. If you could recommend me, like, hey, yes, you should check out, this collection of Zippe e Zappe or something. I would consider checking that out, but I definitely would not want to keep reading just these 16-page newspaper comic strip collections in the format that I read today. Who would I recommend this for? You would really have to be somebody that is interested in either Spanish culture, the Spanish comics in particular, or that kind of older newspaper comics. Like if you're an academic, I'm sure this is great. If your area of study is the comics that came out during the Franco regime, hey, here you go. Check it out. For most of you, I would say, like I said, stick to collections of this stuff that maybe has been edited. Maybe they only selected the best of these newspaper comics. You don't need to, like I have a few books from the Complete Peanuts or Complete Calvin and Hobbes. You don't need to be reading the complete Tontalin. I think that you should be fine with that. Just stick to the best of the little edited collections, like I said. But thank you for watching this video. Like I said, it would mean a lot to me if you like this video and subscribe to my channel. I am trying to maximize the amount of people that get to participate in this challenge, that get to experience the joys of reading comics and talking about comics, and ideally creating a community of like-minded people who like to read comics outside of their comfort zone and experience new things. So if that's you, or if you know somebody that fits, thank you for watching, and share the video with somebody that loves comics in that same way. And so until next time, this has been Divining Comics. Never let the magic of comics die.
Old Enoch, he lived to be 365 when the Lord came and took him back to heaven alive. I saw the light from heaven shining all around. I saw the light come shining. I saw that light come down.